Hey everybody, welcome to the video. It's Saturday, July 24th, and we're breaking down this 10-game main slate that we have over on DraftKings today, and it's shaping up to be another good slate here. We got some good high-end pitching options, we got some good SP2s, we got a lot of good offenses to talk about, so should definitely be a fun one to break down here. Also, there is a 4-game early slate today that starts around 4 p.m. Eastern. Not going to be covering it in this video, but if you want some quick tips there, it's pretty much as simple as stacking the Nationals versus Matt Harvey. I know the Nationals really sucked last night for us, only scored 1 run courtesy of a solo shot from Josh Bell, but I'm going to go right back to the well there versus one of the worst starting pitchers in baseball in a very hitter-friendly park in Camden Yards. Also, you can play Max Scherzer versus the Orioles, who have been much worse versus righties compared to lefties this season, and the rest kind of falls into place after that. But if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so, and if you don't follow me over on social media, you know where to do so using the handles in the bottom hand corner of your screen. And if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon and get access to some extra content, including my projections, my optimizer website, ownership projections, rankings, cheat sheets, my entire data sheet, which has all the numbers you'd ever want, color-coded nice and neat, so it's pretty easy to follow, including my cheat sheet and my Discord community. Link is down below in the description for that. And since it's around the end of the month, and Patreon will charge you on the first of the month and on sign up. If you do sign up today, you can get the rest of this week free as long as you continue your patronage for the month of August. So it is one of the best times to sign up to get your extra bang for your buck. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by Prize Picks. I'm sure most of you know what it is by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified. Just you versus the projections. You don't have to worry about sharks, 150 max contests, salary cap restrictions, or anything like that. It's just you versus the props that they offer each and every single day. And there's some pretty soft ones that you can find throughout the day as well. So as of right now, if you do want to sign up, you can go to prizepicks.com or use the link down below, and you can get a free money bonus up to $100. That's an instant deposit match up to $100, so it's free money. Why not use it to your advantage when you use code CPEN? You better make sure you tell them I sent you. But I think that's it for the plugs for the most part, so without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as per usual, we'll start with the pitchers and move on to the bats. And there's no shortage of good options here. We got some good aces on the mound. We got some good SP2s. So it doesn't look like we'll have to make any uncomfortable decisions at pitcher tonight. Just pick your favorite of the bunch. But we'll start up top here with our ace of the slate. It's Corbin Burnes, $10,600. Doesn't exactly draw the best matchup here versus the White Sox, but it is better to be a righty versus them compared to a lefty because they've been mashing lefties for a couple of seasons now. But I can definitely get behind some Corbin Burnes just because of the talent here, and Vegas would agree. Only a 3.3 implied team total. He is a slight favorite in an 8K prop as well, and his numbers on the season have been very, very elite. 2.07 xFIP, which is even better than his ERA, which is at 2.16, which is almost hard to believe. And over a 37% K rate, only a 4% walk rate, so those are excellent ratios right there. Over 13 Ks per 9, limits the power, only a 25% hard contact rate. He has a lean to ground balls, and only 0.3 homers allowed per 9 innings this season, so I can definitely get behind Corbin Burnes here. Like I said, the matchup versus the White Sox, it's not great. They have over a 105 WRC+, a 322 WOBA, a 10% walk rate. They don't really strike out that much versus righties either, but the main thing here is versus lefties, they have a 180 ISO, but to righties, they only have a 144 ISO, so it's definitely a better position to be in from a power standpoint. Plus, this is a hitter-friendly park in Milwaukee, but Corbin Burnes has been so good at limiting power, and the power does drop off quite a bit versus righties for the White Sox here. But I think he's going to be just fine here. He should be able to rack up the strikeouts, and he's coming off a really good game rate, over 40 DraftKings points, struck out near a dozen guys, and the way he's been pitching this season, I think you can make a case for Corbin Burnes being your SP1 in all formats today. And then dropping out of Carlos Rodon here, same game, just opposite side. He's also a little bit cheaper as well, so if you need to save the $500 from Burnes to Rodon, I'd have no issue with that, but you could also play both in the same lineup, and I think that would look pretty good as well, as these should be the two top projection plays in most optimizers today. But pretty good spot here for Rodon, coming off a really good game versus the Astros, which is a very tough matchup as a lefty, so this definitely is a lot softer of a spot here versus the Brewers. Only a 3.6 implied team total against him, is a slight underdog here, but again, tough matchup for the White Sox going up against Corbin Burnes, so you can't really expect him to be the favorite here, but his numbers on the season have looked pretty excellent, actually very similar to Corbin Burnes. Now his xFIP and Sierra are about a run higher than his ERA, but even then those are still really good numbers. Both have around a 37% K rate. He walks guys just a little bit more, but both around 13 Ks per 9. Both limit the power, limits the hard contact, less than a homer per 9. Also more of a lean to fly balls compared to Burnes, where he's a ground ball kind of guy. But like in the spot here versus the Brewers, they are striking out over 27% of the time versus left-handed pitching this season. Now they do walk quite a bit, and they got a little bit of pop. The WRC plus isn't too bad, neither is the WOBA, but I'm chasing strikeouts here for Rodon. I would not be surprised if he can get close to double digits in this game, so I think he's an excellent play. And then dropping down to Chris Bassett, I'm viewing him as a tournament option, kind of a pivot off of the chalk that he's priced between, because obviously Corbin Burns, Carlos Rodon, those guys are going to have massive ownership. Then Kevin Gausman right below him are going to be very chalky as well. And if people are looking for cheaper pitchers, guys like Logan Gilbert and Luis Castillo should pick up some ownership as well. So I think Chris Bassett could kind of get lost a little bit. And it's a really good matchup here versus Seattle. Now, I prefer lefties versus them, but righties are still having pretty good games, and they're still striking out over 26% of the time versus right-handed pitching. The problem with Chris Bassett is his strikeout rate's not nearly as good as guys like Gausman, Rodon, and Burns. That's why I'm kind of struggling to get to him. But since I like the matchup, I figured he was worth mentioning here just as a pivot off of the chalk today. But his numbers are still fine. ERA looks good. The X is below 4, although it's kind of getting close to 4. Sierra's around 3.8. Still a nice, healthy 25% strikeout rate, but when you compare it to guys like Rodon that's sitting at 36.6 and Corbin Burns at 37.2, it's like, just find the extra money for those guys because they have much higher ceilings. But I still think Bassett's a good option here. He limits the power, gets a good amount of ground balls, doesn't really allow too much hard contact, less than a homer per 9. And like I said, this matchup versus Seattle is pretty good. Again, worse versus lefties, but versus righties, they're still struggling with over a 26% K rate, 90 WRC plus, and a little bit below 300. So if you're just hunting good matchups, I think Chris Bassett is a decent option here, although I want the strikeout rates of guys like Rodon and Burns at similar price points. And then Kevin Gausman, $9,700. Pitcher Friendly Park in San Francisco gets a really good matchup here versus Pittsburgh. They don't really strike out too much, so they're kind of annoying in that way, but they really have zero power whatsoever versus right-handed pitching this season. And they have the lowest implied team total in the slate at 3.04. He's a very heavy favorite here. And Kevin Gausman has been really, really good this year. He's got a really nice 1.84 ERA. Now, the XFIP and Sierra about a run and a half higher at 3.4 and 3.37, but those are still really good numbers. 30.5% K rate. He limits the power, gets a decent amount of ground balls, less than a homer per 9, only 30% hard contact rate. And like I said, Pittsburgh, from a run prevention standpoint, this should be a just fine spot here for Kevin Gausman. It's just kind of annoying that they don't really strike out too much, only 22.4% of the time versus right-handed pitching, but the main thing here is a 125 ISO to righties, an 82 WRC plus, and a little bit below 290. So I think Kevin Gausman at that price point is definitely a solid play there. If you can't afford the Corbin Burns, Carlos Rodon combination, if you have to drop down to Kevin Gausman as your SP2, I mean, I still think that's fine, although the price isn't too far off from Carlos Rodon. Like, I would rather drop a bat from $300 or $400 to get to Rodon, but if you really need that extra $400, I don't hate getting down to Kevin Gausman today. Should be a very safe spot. Then if you need some cheaper SP2s, I assume Castillo will be the chalkier option here, but Logan Gilbert I think is an interesting play in tournaments because I don't think a lot of people are going to go his way, especially being priced kind of right beside Luis Castillo, who has been playing some pretty good baseball recently. But in a limited sample size this season, Logan Gilbert has looked like a very solid pitcher. And Oakland offense, I mean, yeah, there's some spots where I do target them, but I'm not overly concerned about it here. They have a team total below 4. He's obviously a slight underdog here, but I mean, Gilbert's numbers have been pretty solid this season. He's got a 3.5 ERA. Now, the XFIP's a little bit high at 3.91, but it's right on par with Chris Bassett, and he's $2,000 cheaper. But a good Sierra at 3.49, a 28.3% strikeout rate. He's been good at limiting the walks as well at only 5.5%. Giving up a little bit of power, though, 166 ISO. He's been a fly ball pitcher, which always kind of gives me the willies, but less than a homer per 9, less than a 30% hard contact rate. And I think Logan Gilbert can be fine in the spot, more of a tournament option here, but I do think he's pretty interesting. And then if you're looking for the chalkier SP2, we have Castillo here at $7,500, who really hasn't had a bad game since like early June. Because I know earlier in the season he was kind of hit or miss, but he's kind of reeled it in. He's been looking pretty good recently, and this is a good matchup versus St. Louis. Now, it's not a high strikeout matchup upside, plus Castillo hasn't been the best strikeout pitcher in the world this year, considering his strikeout rate sitting at only 22%, but the way he's been playing recently, I like the recent form. If you're looking at the spot here versus St. Louis, kind of an annoying spot like Pittsburgh is, where they don't really strike out too much, but versus righties, they've been very pedestrian this season. Only 22% strikeout rate, but they don't walk too much. Only a 148 team ISO, 296 OBP, and an 86 WRC+. I hate the park for pitching. Great American Small Park, one of the best places to hit in all of baseball, kind of right behind Coors Field, especially in the summertime when it's hot and muggy. But I think Castillo should be just fine here. Not expecting a ton of strikeouts, but at $7,500, I think he'll be able to pick up the win. The Cincinnati Reds are in a really good spot offensively, so I think, as long as he can get the 5+ innings, you should be able to get that 4-point bonus over on DraftKings. And his XFIP and Sierra are both lower than his ERA this season. Does struggle with walks a little bit, so he's definitely a shaky pitcher, but only $7,500. I think he definitely makes sense if you need some salary relief for some expensive offenses that we have today. But with that being said, I think we can move right over to the bats, because I think that's pretty much it for the pitching. We got some good offenses to talk about today. And as always, we'll start with the catcher position. We'll start up top with Salvador Perez, $5,500. And to be honest, if I'm double spending up for a pitcher today, probably not using all my funds on offense for the catcher position. So I think these guys like Will Smith and Salvador Perez are mostly tournament options, but I do think the Royals are in a decent spot versus Casey Mize. I don't think he's a bad pitcher or anything, but Detroit typically does not let him work too deep into games, even if he is pitching well, so we should see a decent portion of the Detroit bullpen here, which isn't exactly the best, not the worst, so not as bad as they were in the past, but still definitely not like one of the best bullpens in the league. And Salvador Perez is just one of the best hitting catchers in baseball. Bats around 275 over a 220 ISO. Hits in a prime spot in the order compared to most catchers. So if you got the money for him, great. If not, I don't think it's the worst thing ever. Then Will Smith, $5,300. Definitely a big fan of the Dodgers here, specifically the righties versus Kyle Freeland, although you could use lefties in tournaments, but they have a team total above 5. Obviously, it's not in Coors Field. If this was Coors Field, they'd probably have a team total of around 7 today, but definitely like righties versus Kyle Freeland. He's certainly struggled versus them so far this year, and Dodgers are just one of the best offenses in baseball. Now, unfortunately, we are missing some pretty good pieces from this offense, so it's going to take a little bit of a hit here, but Will Smith, one of the best hitting catchers in baseball, should be betting cleanup, $5,300. Good righty and lefty matchup here versus Freeland, so if you got the money for him, great. Someone to Perez, but if you don't, I don't think it's the end of the world. Then dropping down to a cheap option here, Tucker Barnhart, $2,800. He'll probably end up being the chalk here. There's a couple of other cheaper options as well. So it's mainly just whoever fits in your catcher position when it's all said and done. Just kind of roll with them. That's kind of what I've been doing all season long, because catcher usually is not an important position unless we get like a guy like Will Smith at $4,500 in Coors Field, but that's just not the case today. But Tucker Barnhart, big fan of the Reds. I think they're one of the best stacks, if not the best stack on the slate today. They're going up against Jake Woodford, who he had a good start last time out versus the Chicago Cubs, but besides that, I think this is still just a really good spot for the Reds. It's a very hitter-friendly park in Cincinnati, Great American Small Park, one of the absolute best places to hit. They have a team total of 5.4, which I believe is currently the highest on the slate, so you can sign me up for all these Reds today, righties, lefties. I prefer the lefties, but you can play just about anybody here. And Tucker Barnhart's just a cheap way to get exposure to my favorite offense tonight. And then dropping in at first base, we have Joey Votto, $4,700, kind of continuing that lefty here versus John Woodford. I like all the Reds tonight, so I'll kind of save you the explanation once again, but just a big fan of all the Reds today. G-Man Choi, $4,100. Do you think the Rays are a pretty interesting stack tonight? They have a team total of 4.8 versus Mejia, and it's definitely a big park upgrade going from Tampa to Cleveland, so I think you can look at some of these lefties today in the Tampa Bay lineup. You can also play righties too. Nelson Cruz went deep in his first game as a Tampa Bay Ray, so that was pretty cool to see. And then Lamont Wade, $2,800. Will Crow is not a very good pitcher, and the Giants have a team total of around 5 today, so I think we can definitely use lefties and righties versus him, but I do prefer the lefties. But I certainly think that whole lineup is playable, although the Giants are kind of a weird team to stack. I don't know, it's just, I'm never a big fan of stacking up Giants, but I do think this is a pretty good spot versus Pittsburgh. And then dropping out of second base, we have Brandon Lau, $4,800, who's been chalky the past couple of days, and that might continue here in a good matchup versus Mejia. I kind of talked about it with G-Man Choi, but it's a big park upgrade going to Cleveland for Tampa Bay, and pretty much just like all the lefties here versus Mejia, and Brandon Lau certainly qualifies there. He's also eligible in the outfield. He's got plenty of power versus right-handed pitching, even though his batting average is terrible, and he will strike out quite a bit. And then Jonathan India, $4,700. His price is getting up there, but I'm a big fan of all these Cincinnati bats tonight, righties or lefties. Prefer the lefties, but if India, assuming he's leading off once again, I mean, it's kind of hard to pass him up if you are full stacking the Cincinnati Reds tonight. And then if you want a dirt cheap option here, we have Sheldon Neuse, $2,000, who is the absolute bare minimum. He's a cheap righty here for the Dodgers, assuming he's going to be in the lineup. I mean, if you just want a dirt cheap righty and lefty matchup versus Kyle Freeland on a good offense, Sheldon Neuse is your guy. And he's one of those ways where you can afford the double spend up pitcher tonight and still get some expensive bats as well. And then dropping to third base, we have Justin Turner, $5,600. He's been playing very good baseball this season, betting above 300 with close to a 200 ISO and a 147 WRC+. Has always hit left-handed pitching very, very well, and it's definitely a really good spot here versus Kyle Freeland. Eugenio Suarez, $4,000. Just cheap exposure here to the Cincinnati Reds. Like I said, prefer the lefties, but there's a lot of righties in this lineup, and I still think they grade out just fine versus Jake Woodford. Now, the only thing Eugenio Suarez does well is hit for some power because he strikes out like half the time, it feels like, and his batting average is absolutely terrible, as is his WOBA and WRC+, but he does have around a 200 ISO this year, so you're mainly just hunting for a cheaper home run here out of Eugenio Suarez, but it's a great park, and I'm a big fan of the offense. Then Wilmer Flores, $3,800. I always prefer him versus lefties, but like I said, I pretty much like everybody here for the Giants team total close to 5, and I love the spot versus Will Crow, so Don't hate the price tag for Flores, plus he's going to be hitting in a prime spot in the order. And then dropping out of shortstop, we have Chris Taylor, $5,700. Very, very expensive here, but shortstop is a terrible position tonight, so if you just want to make it a priority to spend it for Chris Taylor, I wouldn't have an issue with that. Or since it's such a bad spot, you could spend all the way down as well. But I was struggling to find some options that I like, so I kind of just threw on some players from teams that I like tonight. But Chris Taylor, ready to let the matchup, should be leading off here versus Kyle Freeland. I think he makes plenty of sense. Kyle Farmer, $3,500, the dirt cheap option here from the Cincinnati Reds. I believe he went deep last night. I'd have to double check that, but I'm pretty sure he went deep. But I know he's in the bottom of the order. He's kind of been struggling with injuries this season, but $3,500. I mean, if you just want a cheap portion of the Cincinnati Reds offense, I think he's fine. Then Harold Castro, $2,700. Don't hate Detroit tonight. Don't love them either, but I think they're in a decent spot here versus Hernandez. Kind of hard to gauge how Detroit's going to do tonight, but 4.6 implied team total here, only $2,700. They've been hitting well recently. I don't hate the idea of using Castro, but I'm not overly confident in it. Then dropping down to the outfield, we have plenty of good options here, and there wasn't really anybody that was super expensive that I found very interesting, so kind of some mid-range and cheap options. But we have Jesse Winker, $4,500, who's probably close to a core play for me today. He's been crushing right-handed pitching all season long, and he just feels a little bit too cheap here. I know like last week where he was like $3,800, he's not, unfortunately for us, he's not that cheap, but that should limit his ownership at least a little bit, because I think in cash games at one point, he was close to 80% owned, which is absolutely insane. But versus right-handed pitching this season, Jesse Winker has been a monster, only striking out 14.5% of the time, but a 670 slugging, 422 OBP, over 1,000 OPS, 459 WOBA, 321 ISO, and a 350 batting average. So Jesse Winker is going to be one of the best plays in the entire slate. That's probably going to reflect in ownership as well. Austin Meadows, $4,200, kind of the same exact play as Brandon Lau, where his batting average isn't very good. Does strike out quite a bit, but he has got plenty of pop versus right-handed pitching, and he's not overly expensive as well, batting cleanup for the Tampa Bay Rays. Then AJ Pollock, $4,000. There's quite a few guys out for the Dodgers here, so he's going to get a nice bump in the order. $4,000, cheap right the matchup versus Kyle Freeland. Definitely like AJ Pollock quite a bit tonight. Michael Brantley, $3,600, up against overrated Kyle Gibson. He got destroyed last time out versus Detroit. And his xFIP and SIERA about 2 runs higher than his ERA, so it's definitely catching up to him quite a bit. And Michael Brantley, at this price point, is always going to be playable for me versus a pretty average righty. I know Kyle Gibson's been good this year on the surface. His underlying numbers are definitely not promising for Kyle Gibson. I just like that price point for one of the best pure hitters in baseball. And then dropping down to a couple Detroit Tiger outfielders here, we have Robbie Grossman and Akil Baddoo. If you had to pick between two of them, I would definitely pick Baddoo here. He's been playing really well recently. Only $3,400 should be leading off here versus a righty. So I like Baddoo quite a bit. I think he's a good cash game play. Grossman's playable as well, but probably only if I'm full stacking Detroit up. But definitely a big fan of Baddoo leading off here versus a right-handed pitcher. Tyler Naquin, $2,600. Love that price point. I could see him being very chalky once again. I think you could pretty much just play all three Cincinnati Reds outfielders in cash games. Like Jesse Winker's in a good spot. Tyler Naquin's really cheap in a good spot. He's been doing well versus righties this season. Then Aquino potentially getting cleanup here. I know it's a righty-on-righty matchup, but in a short sample size this year, he's been crushing the baseball. So I think all these guys are excellent plays. I always call Naquin the great value version of Jesse Winker because his numbers aren't quite as good, but he has been hitting right-handed pitching very well this year, and pretty much think all those guys are in play, and they do hit in pretty good spots in the order. But I think with that being said, guys, that'll be it for the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so. You can follow me over on Twitter at ChrisPennell16 or CPenn16 over on IG. If you want to help support the channel over on Patreon, get access to some extra content. Link is down below in the description for that. But like I said earlier in the video, if you do sign up and continue your patronage on August 1st, I'll be more than happy to refund this week for you so you can get it for free. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by Prize Picks, just you versus the projections. There's no sharks, no 150 max contest, salary cap restrictions, or anything like that. Just you versus the projections and the props that they offer each and every single day. And right now, you can get a free money bonus up to $100. It's an instant deposit match up to $100 using code CPEN upon sign up. So it's free money. Why not use it to your advantage? But I think that's pretty much it. I will stop rambling, and I hope you guys enjoy the start to your weekend.